Princess Alicia lived in a grand palace on the beautiful world of Taloria. The palace shone under the light of twin suns, and every corner of the kingdom was planned with care. The streets were clean, and the gardens were filled with rare, colorful flowers. Taloria was a land of strict traditions where people valued wisdom, honor, and the art of diplomacy. Alicia was a bright and determined young woman. As the princess, she was expected to follow many customs, including the rules about choosing a partner. In Taloria, most of the eligible men were from her own kind. However, Alicia never felt a spark with any of them. She dismissed every male suitor from her own species, believing that they all clung too tightly to old ways and rigid traditions. In her eyes, none of them could understand the freedom of thought that she so deeply valued. Every day, Alicia walked the palace gardens, a peaceful place with ancient statues and winding paths lined with blooming flowers. Even though the gardens were lovely, she often felt a deep loneliness as she strolled along the quiet paths. Beneath her confident and royal exterior, she secretly yearned for something more, a spark of surprise that would change her life forever. She dreamed of a meeting with someone who saw the world differently, someone who could share her desire for adventure beyond the rules of her society. In the quiet hours of the morning, while the palace was still asleep, Alicia would sit by her window and gaze at the horizon. The light of the rising suns filled her room with soft gold, and in that gentle glow, she allowed herself to wonder about life beyond Taloria. She thought of faraway worlds and people who did not follow the same strict customs. Her heart beat with hope for a future where she could explore new ideas and experiences. At school, Alicia learned about the history of her people, the great leaders who had shaped Taloria, and the delicate art of keeping peace among different worlds. Yet, in every lesson and story, she felt a longing for change. She read old scrolls about distant lands and imagined a life filled with wonder and excitement rather than endless formalities and polite rejections. Though many admired her intelligence and beauty, Alicia often felt that the people around her lived in a comfortable routine that did not match her inner desire for something bold and new. Unbeknownst to her, the winds of change were beginning to stir. Every night, as the twin suns set and the sky turned deep blue, Alicia looked out at the stars with a hopeful heart. She believed that beyond the borders of her strict society lay a future filled with unexpected encounters and genuine connection. And so, in her heart, the princess quietly wished for a surprise that would bring a new and exciting chapter to her life. A chapter that might finally fill the emptiness that even the splendor of Taloria could not reach. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, Princess Alicia sat in her private study. The large window beside her showed the darkening sky, filled with stars twinkling like tiny diamonds. She often spent her nights looking at the stars, wondering what kind of lives existed on other worlds. But tonight, something different happened. A soft beep echoed through the quiet room. It came from a small device on her desk, a communication terminal connected to Taloria's interstellar channels. Alicia frowned. Messages sent directly to her were rare, and most came from royal officials or ambassadors. But this message was unusual. She tapped the screen, and a simple text appeared. To the esteemed people of Taloria, I am Captain Adrian Cole, a representative from the human colony of Terra Prime. I seek knowledge and understanding between our worlds. If your people are willing, I would be honored to learn more about Taloria and its customs. Respectfully, Adrian Cole. Alicia's eyes widened. A human. She had studied their species before. They were unpredictable, known for their emotional intensity and creativity. Unlike the structured and disciplined Talorians, humans embraced change, risk, and passion. Some saw them as reckless. Others admired their boldness. Alicia had never met one in person, but now, for the first time, she had a chance. She hesitated, unsure how to respond. Her advisors had always told her that humans were dangerous, too unpredictable to trust. But something about the message felt different. There was no arrogance, no demand, only curiosity and respect. It intrigued her. The princess leaned back in her chair, tapping her fingers against the desk. Should she ignore the message? Should she tell the council? Or should she? Another beep. This time, it wasn't just text. A small holographic projection flickered to life above the terminal. A man stood there, tall and composed. He had short, slightly messy brown hair, sharp blue eyes, and a calm expression. He wore a dark uniform with a simple emblem on his chest, showing his status as a diplomat. "Greetings," he said, his voice steady. "I don't know if anyone will hear this, but if you do, I simply wish to talk. I believe there is much we can learn from one another." Alicia felt a strange feeling in her chest, curiosity mixed with something she couldn't quite name. She had heard countless speeches from suitors and noblemen before, all filled with self-importance and rehearsed charm. But this human's words felt real. For the first time in her life, someone had surprised her. She took a deep breath, then, against every expectation, she tapped the screen and replied, "Captain Adrian Cole, your message is received. Let us see if your words hold truth." With that, she sent the message, knowing her world was about to change forever. The royal palace of Taloria was a place of order and tradition. Every visitor had to pass through strict security checks, follow specific protocols, and behave according to the customs of the royal court. But today, something unusual was happening. A human vessel had arrived in Taloria's orbit. Princess Alicia watched from her balcony as the sleek silver ship hovered above the city. It was smaller than the grand warships of the Talorian fleet, but something about it felt different. It wasn't built for war or intimidation. It was built for diplomacy. Inside the palace, high-ranking officials gathered in the grand hall, whispering among themselves. Most of them were skeptical. Humans were unpredictable, too emotional, too reckless. Why had the princess agreed to meet one? Alicia ignored their concerns. She had made her decision. This Captain Adrian Cole had intrigued her, and she wanted to see for herself what made humans so different. A low hum filled the air as the human ship descended onto the palace landing pad. The doors slid open with a hiss, and a tall figure stepped out. Captain Adrian Cole was not what the officials expected. He wasn't heavily armored, nor did he carry any weapons. He walked forward with steady confidence, his sharp blue eyes scanning his surroundings with curiosity rather than arrogance. He wore a formal yet simple uniform, with no excessive decorations or unnecessary displays of power. Alicia stood at the top of the palace steps, watching him closely. The moment he reached the base of the stairs, he did something that took everyone by surprise. He bowed. Not a deep, exaggerated bow like the suitors of her court, but a respectful nod of the head. It was a small gesture, yet it spoke volumes. He wasn't here to beg for her favor or impress her with grand words. He was here as an equal. "Princess Alicia," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It's an honor to meet you." Alicia tilted her head slightly, observing him. His posture was relaxed but respectful. There was no fear in his expression, nor any arrogance. For the first time in a long while, she felt something unexpected, genuine interest. "The honor is yet to be determined, Captain Cole," she replied smoothly. "Tell me, what is it that brings a human diplomat to Taloria?" Adrian smiled slightly. "Curiosity, Princess. I've read about your world, your traditions, your people. But reading isn't the same as experiencing. I wanted to see it for myself." A few nobles scoffed at his response, but Alicia's lips curved into the smallest hint of a smile. A suitor from her own kind would have spoken in rehearsed lines about admiration and beauty. But this human, he was honest. For the first time in her life, she didn't immediately dismiss someone. This meeting was going to be interesting. The grand hall of the palace was a masterpiece of Talorian architecture. Tall golden pillars, intricate glass ceilings reflecting the twin suns, and banners displaying the royal emblem. Princess Alicia sat on her throne, her posture poised, her expression unreadable. Captain Adrian Cole stood in the center of the hall, facing her. Around him, high-ranking nobles and advisors watched closely, their expressions ranging from curiosity to doubt. The presence of a human in the royal court was unprecedented. Alicia studied him carefully. Unlike her previous suitors, who dressed in elaborate robes and spoke with rehearsed words, Adrian wore a simple but well-fitted uniform. His posture was relaxed, yet respectful. There was no nervousness, no attempt to impress her with exaggerated flattery. "You traveled far, Captain Cole," Alicia said, her voice smooth and controlled. "Most who come to Taloria seek alliances, resources, or power. But you claim you are here out of curiosity." Adrian nodded. "Yes, Princess. I believe true understanding comes from experience, not just words in a report. I want to learn about your people, not as an outsider looking at records, but as someone who sees them firsthand." A murmur spread through the court. Curiosity. Learning? No suitor or diplomat had ever spoken like this before. Alicia raised an eyebrow. "You are bold, Captain. Do you expect me to simply grant you access to Taloria's secrets?" Adrian smiled slightly. "Not at all. I expect nothing. I only hope for an opportunity to learn, and to share knowledge in return." Alicia leaned back in her throne. Most suitors spoke in grand, predictable ways, declaring admiration and promising loyalty. But this human was different. He spoke as if he were an equal, as if he truly wanted to know her world, not just win favor. For the first time in years, someone had surprised her. She glanced at her advisors. They were waiting for her to dismiss him, as she had done with so many before. But something in her resisted the idea. Instead, she made a decision that would shock them all. "I will grant you 3 days, Captain," she announced. "You may observe, ask questions, and experience Taloria under my guidance. But be warned, our customs are strict, and any disrespect will not be tolerated." Adrian inclined his head. "I understand, Princess. I'll respect your ways." Alicia's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer. "Then we shall see if a human can truly learn the ways of Taloria, or if you will be like the rest." With that, she stood, signaling the end of the formal meeting. As she walked away, she could feel Adrian's steady gaze on her. For the first time, in a long time, Alicia felt intrigued. Perhaps this human's visit would not be so dull after all. The next morning, Princess Alicia led Captain Adrian Cole through the heart of Taloria's capital. The towering crystal structures shimmered under the twin suns, casting long shadows on the streets below. Everything was meticulously designed: smooth roads, gardens filled with rare flora, and statues honoring the ancestors of her people. The city was beautiful, but also controlled, every detail planned with precision. Adrian walked beside her, his gaze moving across the city with quiet curiosity. Unlike most visitors, he didn't comment on the grandeur of the buildings or the wealth of the royal district. Instead, he watched the people, how they moved, how they spoke, how they avoided unnecessary disruptions. "Your world is orderly," Adrian observed. Alicia glanced at him. "You say that as if it is unusual." He shook his head. "Not unusual, just different. Humans thrive in chaos. We build, we fail, we adapt. Your people, on the other hand, seem to have removed uncertainty entirely." Alicia considered his words. He wasn't wrong. Taloria's strength came from its ability to maintain balance and control. Every law, every tradition ensured stability. And yet, for some reason, Adrian's words made her question whether something was missing. As they walked, they reached the Great Archive, a towering structure filled with centuries of knowledge. Alicia had chosen this place because it represented the heart of Talorian wisdom. "Here," she said, leading him inside, "you will find the history of our people, our laws, our philosophy." Adrian ran a hand over the smooth, glowing tablets that lined the walls. "And does it ever change?" he asked. She frowned. "Change?" He turned to her, blue eyes sharp. "New ideas, new discoveries, or is everything set in stone?" Alicia hesitated. We honor the wisdom of our ancestors. Adrian gave a small smile. But what if new wisdom is discovered? The question lingered in the air. For the first time, Alicia found herself unsure of how to answer. No one had ever asked her that before. Before she could respond, a sudden commotion broke out in the courtyard outside. Alicia and Adrian stepped forward to see a group of diplomats from a neighboring planet arguing with Talorian officials. The visiting diplomats were upset, their voices rising. They demand an immediate meeting with the council, one of Alicia's guards informed her. A misunderstanding regarding trade agreements. Alicia sighed. Such situations were common, and usually, strict adherence to protocol solved them. But before she could intervene, Adrian stepped forward. "Let me try," he said. She raised an eyebrow, but nodded, curious. Adrian approached the arguing diplomats, his tone calm but firm. Instead of lecturing them on Talorian law, he asked them direct questions, listening intently. Then, using simple reasoning, he suggested a compromise, one that respected both parties. To Alicia's astonishment, the argument ended within minutes. The diplomats, satisfied, agreed to formal discussions without further conflict. Alicia stared at Adrian, realizing something remarkable. Humans didn't just adapt to chaos. They mastered it. Princess Alicia had seen many diplomats handle disputes, but never like this. Talorian officials followed strict guidelines, sticking to the exact words of ancient agreements. Adrian, however, had done something different. He listened, understood, and adapted. As the sun began to set, Alicia led Adrian through the palace gardens. The air was filled with the scent of exotic flowers, and the golden light reflected off the crystal fountains. It was a place of beauty and peace, yet tonight, Alicia's mind was restless. "You did something unusual today," she finally said, breaking the silence. "You resolved the conflict without quoting laws or enforcing rules. Instead, you simply talked." Adrian smiled slightly. Talking is underestimated. Sometimes, people just want to feel heard before they make a decision. Alicia glanced at him, intrigued. "That is not how we solve things in Taloria. Here, tradition and wisdom guide every choice. And has that always worked?" Adrian asked, tilting his head. She hesitated. "It has kept order. But has it allowed change?" He pressed. Alicia frowned. Change. That word again. It wasn't that she feared change. It was that Taloria had never needed it. At least, that was what she had always been told. But now, after seeing how Adrian handled conflict, she wasn't so sure. "You think humans are better at this?" she asked, crossing her arms. Adrian shook his head. "Not better. Just different. Humans make mistakes all the time. We fail, we struggle, but we also learn. We grow. We don't have the luxury of perfect traditions, so we adapt." Alicia looked up at the evening sky, her mind turning. The structured world of Taloria had always felt secure, but was security the same as progress? As they continued walking, Adrian noticed a group of young Talorian children practicing traditional dances in the courtyard. Their movements were precise, their expressions serious as they followed every step perfectly. Adrian chuckled. Back on Earth, if kids were practicing, they'd probably be laughing, messing up, and trying again. Alicia raised an eyebrow. "Failure is not encouraged here." "But failure is how we learn," Adrian said. "If you never fail, how do you know what you're truly capable of?" That question stayed with Alicia. She had spent her entire life following the correct path, making no mistakes, never questioning the traditions. But was that truly living? For the first time, she looked at Adrian not just as an outsider, but as someone who saw the world in a way she had never considered. His people were flawed, but in those flaws, they found strength. As they reached the palace steps, Alicia turned to him. "You have 3 days left, Captain Cole. Teach me more about how your people think." Adrian smiled. "It would be my pleasure, Princess." And with that, the first cracks in her old beliefs had begun to form. Over the next few days, Adrian Cole was given unprecedented access to the inner workings of Tellurian society. The princess herself guided him through ancient libraries, showed him sacred sites, and even invited him to observe a council session. Everywhere he went, Adrian asked thoughtful questions, his curiosity never faltering. Alicia found herself both amused and impressed by his enthusiasm. In return, Adrian shared stories about Earth, its history, its struggles, its triumphs. He talked about the ingenuity of humans, their ability to build and rebuild, their art and music, and their endless drive to explore. His words painted a picture of a world that was chaotic, yes, but also vibrant and full of possibility. Alicia was particularly fascinated by human art. Tellurians valued precision and symmetry in their creations, but Adrian described paintings and sculptures on Earth that broke all the rules. Pieces that were messy, emotional, and deeply personal. He showed her a holographic image of a human painting, the strokes uneven and wild, yet full of life. "You call this art?" Alicia asked, her head tilted as she examined the hologram. "We do," Adrian replied, "because it's not about following the rules. It's about expressing something inside that words can't fully capture." For the first time, Alicia saw beauty in imperfection. Later, Adrian was invited to join a traditional Tellurian meal. The dining hall was a masterpiece of architecture, with glowing crystal chandeliers and intricately carved walls. The meal itself was a ritual, each course served in a precise order, each dish crafted with mathematical accuracy. Adrian watched closely, respectfully following the traditions, but his questions never stopped. "Why do you serve this particular dish first?" he asked one of the attendants. "It symbolizes the beginning of the journey," the attendant explained. "To start a meal with anything else would disrupt the balance." "And what if you tried starting with something new?" Adrian asked, genuinely curious. "Would it still taste as good?" The attendants exchanged confused glances, but Alicia couldn't help but smile. Adrian wasn't mocking their traditions. He was inviting them to think differently. It was a small moment, but it showed how humans saw possibilities where others saw rigid boundaries. By the end of the evening, even the skeptical nobles were starting to view Adrian with a bit more respect. His questions, though unconventional, had a way of making them think. And while many of them still clung to tradition, a few began to wonder if there was value in looking beyond the familiar. As Alicia walked Adrian back to his quarters, she spoke softly. "Your ways are very different from ours." "Different isn't always bad," Adrian said. "Sometimes it's just different." Alicia nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. For so long, she had viewed humans as impulsive and unpredictable. Now she was starting to see them as something else entirely, an opportunity to learn, to grow, and perhaps to change. "You said." As the third day drew to a close, Alicia found herself reflecting on everything she had seen and heard. The human captain, Adrian Cole, had challenged her in ways she never expected. His stories of Earth's resilience, his curiosity, and his willingness to fail and learn. These were concepts Alicia had rarely encountered. She had always believed Telluria's strength lay in its perfection, its unwavering traditions. But now, doubts began to creep in. That evening, Alicia retreated to her favorite corner of the palace gardens. The twin suns had set, leaving the sky a deep indigo scattered with stars. She sat on a smooth stone bench, the air filled with the faint fragrance of the flowers surrounding her. For the first time in years, she felt truly alone with her thoughts. And those thoughts wouldn't let her rest. Adrian's voice echoed in her mind. "If you never fail, how do you know what you're capable of?" It was a strange idea, almost unthinkable in her world. Failure was something Tellurians avoided at all costs. Every law, every tradition, every practice was designed to prevent mistakes. Yet humans embraced them, and by doing so, they discovered new strengths, new paths, New ideas. Hadrian's words had planted a seed, and now it was beginning to grow. The soft crunch of footsteps on the garden path broke her reverie. She looked up and saw Adrian approaching. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Am I intruding?" he asked, his tone polite. "No," she replied, motioning for him to sit. "You're welcome here." He took a seat on the edge of the bench, his posture relaxed. For a moment, they sat in silence, listening to the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. "You've been quiet today," Adrian said after a while. "Is everything all right?" Alicia hesitated before answering. "You've given me much to think about, Captain." He tilted his head, waiting for her to continue. "You speak of growth through failure, of learning through mistakes. It is unsettling. I have always believed that strength comes from maintaining order, from preserving tradition. But now I wonder if we have limited ourselves by never allowing change." Adrian's expression softened. "It's not easy to question what you've always known, but sometimes asking those questions is the only way to move forward." Alicia glanced at him. "And do you think my people should abandon our ways? Embrace chaos, like humans?" "Not chaos," Adrian said, "but maybe a little flexibility. A little willingness to try something new. You don't have to lose what makes Taloria great. You just have to be open to the idea that you can be even greater." His words settled over her like a gentle breeze, calming yet full of possibility. For the first time, Alicia felt the weight of her position not as a burden, but as an opportunity. She had the power to guide her people, to lead them into a future where tradition and innovation could coexist. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "it's time to try." Adrian nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "I think that's a good place to start." By the morning of the fourth day, the once quiet corridors of the palace were buzzing with an unusual energy. Word of Princess Alicia's growing interest in human ideas had spread among the court. Some nobles whispered anxiously, fearing the erosion of long-standing customs. Others, mostly the younger advisors, were intrigued, wondering if the princess's openness could lead to a brighter future for Taloria. Alicia herself felt a strange mix of excitement and uncertainty. The human captain had challenged her views, and she could no longer ignore the truths she'd seen. While tradition gave her people a solid foundation, it also kept them from embracing new opportunities. She had spent her life dismissing suitors who offered her nothing but rehearsed compliments. Adrian's honest curiosity, his willingness to question and adapt, those qualities had begun to shift her perspective. That afternoon, Alicia summoned the royal council. The grand chamber was filled with nobles and advisors, each wearing their finest attire. Their faces were calm, but their eyes betrayed nervous anticipation. The princess, as always, sat tall and poised, her hands resting lightly on the arms of her ornate chair. "I have called you here to address an important matter," Alicia began, her voice steady and clear. "For generations, we have relied on tradition to guide us. It has brought stability and prosperity. But it has also kept us from exploring new ideas." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some advisors exchanged concerned glances, while others leaned forward, intrigued. During these last few days, Alicia continued, "I have seen how another way of thinking can spark innovation. Captain Adrian Cole, a representative of humanity, has shown me that change does not have to mean chaos. It can mean growth, progress, and the discovery of new strengths." Adrian, standing quietly at the side of the room, nodded respectfully. He had not expected Alicia to speak so openly, but he understood the importance of her words. "I am not suggesting that we abandon who we are," Alicia clarified. "Our culture, our history, our values, they remain the foundation of Taloria. But perhaps it is time to allow for new perspectives, to encourage creativity, to embrace curiosity, and to learn from others without fear of losing our identity." One of the elder advisors rose, his expression cautious. "Princess, this is an unexpected direction. How do you propose we introduce these ideas without disrupting our society?" Alicia met his gaze calmly. By starting small, by inviting scholars from other worlds to share their knowledge, by encouraging our own citizens to experiment and innovate, by listening not just to each other, but to those beyond our borders. The chamber fell silent. Alicia's words carried a weight that none could ignore. She had not only taken the first step toward change, she had shown her council that evolution was not a threat, but an opportunity. As the meeting concluded, Alicia felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. For the first time, she was not just the princess of Taloria. She was its guide into a new era. The royal court remained quiet after Alicia's speech. Adrian stood silently in the back, observing the ripple of reactions. Some advisors nodded thoughtfully. Others still clung to their reservations, but no one openly objected. The princess had planted a seed of change, one that would take time to grow. As the council session ended, Alicia rose gracefully from her throne and made her way toward Adrian. The nobles parted to let her pass, their faces a mixture of respect and curiosity. When she reached him, she paused, searching his face for any sign of judgment. Instead, she found a gentle smile. "Thank you for being patient with us," she said quietly. "With me." Adrian shook his head. "I didn't come here to tell anyone what to do. I just wanted to share a different perspective. You made the decision yourself." Alicia nodded. She knew he was right. While Adrian's words had sparked her thoughts, the choice to act was entirely her own. She had never imagined that a simple human captain could have such an impact on her, her court, or her world. But here they were, standing on the threshold of something entirely new. "You'll be returning to Earth soon," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I wonder, what will you tell your people about us?" Adrian thought for a moment, then replied, "I'll tell them about a world that values beauty and tradition, a world that shows remarkable discipline. But I'll also tell them about a princess who dared to see beyond the familiar, who had the courage to consider something different." Alicia smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "That's generous of you." "It's the truth," Adrian replied simply. They walked together through the palace corridors, passing by crystal windows that offered a breathtaking view of Taloria's twin suns setting. The orange and gold hues bathed the world in warmth, and for a moment, everything seemed perfectly balanced: past and future, tradition and change. "Do you think we'll succeed?" Alicia asked as they paused at the balcony overlooking the city. Adrian rested his hands on the railing, gazing at the bustling streets below. "I think you already have. Taking that first step, opening your mind to new possibilities. That's the hardest part. Everything after that is just figuring it out as you go." The princess considered his words, then nodded. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. For the first time, the future didn't seem so rigid. It felt open, alive with possibility. As the sky darkened and stars began to shine, Alicia turned to Adrian. "You've given me more than I expected, Captain Cole. You've given me hope." Adrian smiled. "And you've given me a reason to come back." Alicia laughed softly, a sound that surprised even herself. "Then I suppose this isn't the end after all." "No," Adrian said. "It's just the beginning." And with that, Taloria stepped into a new chapter, one defined by both tradition and the courage to embrace the unknown.